And welcome, my name's Lloyd Ross, and this is another episode of Ask RPM. And we're talking about property again today, because that's what we do, talk about property. This question comes in from New South Wales. So, getting a lot of these questions lately from investors interstate. So we're based in Queensland. And what we're finding now is people asking us quite often, is Queensland the state to invest in at the moment? Is Sydney the area to invest in? Is Melbourne the area to invest in? Perth, Darwin. And each state and each city has got merits and downsides to it. And not every city is always great to invest in. There's different times that's good and different times that's not so good. So at the moment, what we're finding is that I don't think you have to be a genius to work out that the Sydney property market is a little bit overheated, and by a little bit I mean a lot. The yields there are so low. There's people in the western suburbs paying huge amounts of money for homes that don't throw off enough cash flow to justify their value. And if you're getting a mortgage in Sydney and it's $1.2 million mortgage and it's a home you're living in, and interest rates are say 5%, you're paying just a bit over $50,000 a year just in interest. When those interest rates go up to 8%, you're going to pay $100,000 a year in interest. So it's going to be an intrepid path for some of those people, I think, going forward as the RBA starts to increase interest rates following the United States Federal Reserve rate rises this year, I think of which there'll be 2 or 3. We probably won't raise rates here in Australia for another couple of years, but as that starts to happen, people will feel the pinch in their home mortgage. So again, the other day I spoke about how having a property investment is always a good hedge against interest rate rises. But anyway, getting back to the point, where's a good place to invest now? So let's look at the facts. Melbourne is actually the fastest growing capital city in Australia. No doubt about that. If you Google it, you'll find that. Sydney's growing quite well because it's a large city. It doesn't grow quite as quickly. It grows about 1% a year. Queensland state as a state is growing at about 2% a year. And we've got in Queensland, Brisbane and Gold Coast. So Gold Coast is not classed as a capital city. Incidentally, it's growing at 6% per annum. 6%. So it's growing at 4 times the state average, which is, or 3 times the state average, which is quite tremendous growth for a city. What we're finding in northern suburbs of Gold Coast and southern suburbs of Brisbane is that you can still buy a good quality home, like a large 4-bedroom, dual, either 2-level or split level on a 600 to 1,000 square metre block. I did a 1,000 square metre block the other day for yields of still 4.8% gross yields. Whereas if you go to Sydney and Melbourne, particularly in Sydney, you have yields that are like 3%. So there's a massive yield compression happening in Sydney, and that means that the values have skyrocketed and the rental income has not. So you're having this low yield. So when you take into consideration tax and operating costs of the property and inflation, people are often making a 0% cash yield or return off that property, and they're just banking on growth. The problem with that is, what happens if it doesn't grow? Right? What happens if it's gone through 10% growth or 15% growth the last 3 years, as it has, and there's not a lot of growth left? What happens then? So I think at the moment, let's look at Perth. It's going down in value. It's very difficult to try and catch a falling knife. How far it's going to fall, we don't know. That's come off the back of the drop in the mining boom. There might be some bargains in Perth, but again, don't know how far it's going to fall. You have to be very delicate as to what suburbs you're picking. Darwin, really expensive, and it's coming backwards. South Australia, no growth. Hobart, great yields, no growth. No population growth, I mean. And then we've got the likes of Sydney, good population growth, but the property prices have escalated too quickly and rents aren't catching up. Melbourne, similar story to Sydney. I think it will actually overtake Sydney in terms of the value. So we'll see the same sort of yield compression. If you look at Southeast Queensland at the moment, it seems to have the best value for money, for what you can buy. You can buy a brand new property investment and you can get a 4.8% yield on it, gross. So straight away you can see that there's plenty of room for it to grow. there's still room. We might get double-digit growth this year. And with the Commonwealth Games coming in the southeast corner of Queensland, all the infrastructure spending, the population growth of the Gold Coast, which is extremely high, and you've got the situation where Brisbane's actually linking up to the Gold Coast. So if you're in that pocket of land between those two cities, you're going to do really well, because there's a short squeeze in land there. There's the hinterland or the mountain range on one side, and then the Pacific Ocean on the other side. So there's only a certain amount of land to go around. So the supply is limited, and the demand is accelerating because people are finding that southeast Queensland's the place to move to because of the weather and all the things to do here and so on. Brisbane City, different story. I think Brisbane City is not particularly a good place to invest at the moment, particularly in the unit market. I'm sure you can get some bargains there, but again, it's just a struggle to probably rent it, because if there's a huge oversupply of, say, 3,000 units in Brisbane, then we're going to find, they're really hard to lease, and you can always tell something that's difficult to lease because the developer will offer a 2-year rental guarantee. Again, probably some bargains to be had. When the growth's going to come, no one knows. Can you afford the body corporate fees? It's a personal financial decision to make. Do we think that Brisbane's overcooked? Yes, in the city centre. Do we think that Gold Coast is overcooked? Absolutely not. The Gold Coast has for a long time went sideways after 2002 boom. It probably went sideways for good 8 years, and so now it's our time in the sun. And what we've found is some suburbs have grown at 17% in a quarter. I remember in 2013, Pimpamar grew 17% in one quarter. Is there still some opportunities? Yes, there are. There's some great opportunities northern Gold Coast, where there's a massive town centre being built by Westfield, right near the Commonwealth Games Village. There's the largest hospital in Australia. There's a university. There's great things. There's the theme parks. There's a couple of great options still there. The yield's going to be better than any yield you're going to find in any other capital city today, period. So if you're looking at investing, go for yield and go for growth. And I believe right now, Gold Coast, Northern Gold Coast, Southern Brisbane has got both.